I want to make a video here because I am an enormous X-Men fan. I love them with all my heart. They're my favorite thing in popular culture. X-Men movies, the shows, the video games, some of them. I love it all. I read all the comics that come out, and I've been going back and rereading the older ones that were out before I was into comics and like before I was born. And I'm excited about this new series that's about to launch on Disney+. New is going to be a relative term because it's X-Men 97, which is a continuation of the X-Men animated series from the early 90s. So that series, I guess, never finished. Like, I remember the finale, and they reference it in the trailer where Professor X, is about to die. He says goodbye to all the X-Men, and then that's it. But this is bringing that back. I imagine the way this came to be was Marvel was just looking at some of the things they had and it's like, what do people like? What do we like? What are we maybe not ready to do things with? Like with the X-Men, it's like, well, we're not ready to move forward with them in the movies yet, besides Wolverine and Deadpool, but we do have this animation wing in the studio, so it's an animated thing, and it makes sense as like the next step is reboot this popular cartoon, especially because one of the things that looks like it's doing pretty well is like it touched a lot of X-Men stories, but like not all of them. There's plenty of X-Men stories that it seems like, without totally spoiling, if you just look at like the toys and which characters exist, like we have Magneto in his X-Men uniform, the scene at the UN that's the cover for X-Men 200, like we're getting that arc with Magneto. We're probably going to do the Inferno story with Madeline Pryor, some version of that, so that's fun because like that's really weird. A lot of the stuff with Madeline Pryor is very strange. So I'm excited to have an X-Men series that explores some of those things, especially because a lot of those things, like there full teams that just kind of got explained a little bit and never did anything with, like the X Factor, right? X Factor, not the version that was the original X-Men. Again, this was the one that was like Strong Guy, Havoc, Polaris, Multiple Man, Wolfsbane. I think Forge was on the team then. All of those guys show up in like 2 episodes of the X-Men the Animated Series. So like we could maybe see them again. Looks like Emma Frost is going to play a pretty big role in this season, which is fun. So I really like Emma Frost. Like, she's a really interesting character. And there are a lot of different things you could do with her. You could play her as just Emma Frost, like leader of the Hellfire Club. You could play her as Emma Frost, leader of the Hellions. You could have the Hellions be part of it. I don't think they showed up. Well, now that I'm saying this, I'm going to be like, oh, they were in X-Men the Animated Series. I don't remember them in X-Men the Animated Series, but either way, you could do that. You could do the Emma Frost who leads the Massachusetts team during Generation X. You could do the Emma Frost from the Grant Morrison comics who joins the X-Men. There's just a lot of options. But here's the thing with this, and this is my one like caveat, or the thing that I'm maybe not incredibly excited about. I loved X-Men the Animated Series. However, I was born in the very late 80s, so I grew up in the 90s watching this show. And I grew up with the movies coming out in like the 2000s. I was like, early teenager, so a lot of that stuff appealed very directly to me. However, my favorite X-Men thing was X-Men Evolution, a cartoon from the early 2000s that I would imagine part of the reason it existed was because the movies were quite popular. So it was a reinterpretation of the X-Men, modernized so that they fit into the culture of the day, which I wouldn't say necessarily wasn't what the X-Men the Animated Series did. Like, some of those characters did feel quite 90s, right? Like they had Jubilee and Rogue, they were going to the mall. Like they did things that 90s kids do, whereas the 2000s kids felt more like 2000s kids. They dressed like that. They did The Craft. They did a whole episode that's just like they dance like in The Craft. I don't know, it's like a weird thing. But like they did a bunch of other X-Men stories focused on a different group of X-Men, right? Nightcrawler was the main character here. He was never really a main character in the animated series. Yeah, he showed up a couple times, but like he was not focused on. Shadowcat was a huge part of that show, and she was not a big part of the animated series. In fact, I don't even think she showed up, which is probably because of the pride of the X-Men show, and maybe they were just like, we don't want to, do that again. And then Spike, a character that kind of existed in the comics, although I don't believe technically the version of Spike that is Storm's nephew was in the comics before X-Men Evolution showed up. I do think there's characters who are like Spike. There's a character in the X-Statix who's named Tyke. Then there's another character named Spike, I believe, who had similar powers to the character from X-Men Evolution, but was not the same character. Also, now I'm thinking about it, I don't know which one of those came out first. I don't know if that was supposed to be like a take on Spike from the show. It doesn't matter. I don't think their characters survived very long either way. But like that, more than the movies, more than the animated series, is what got me into the X-Men. I loved X-Men Evolution. I still do. I've gone back and watched some episodes and I still enjoy them. I think the way that it builds up the Apocalypse story is really, really smart, like really effective, especially considering how that's been done in recent movies and even how they did it on the animated series. It was not as, thought out. It was this really, really good arc. And there were a lot of arcs that happened over a long period of time on X-Men Evolution. Mystique, you had like the emergence of the Morlocks. It was a very cool show. And they got a lot of deep cut X-Men characters involved in ways that were fun. And yeah, it was like Boom Boom, a deep cut X-Men character. I don't know, like not really, but like at the time she was. And one of the things I think that's so special about the X-Men in the comics is that every generation gets their own X-Men. Obviously, there was the original team, the First Class from the 60s. Then you had the Giant Size X-Men, a new, more diverse team of adult X-Men. At the same time, then you get the new X-Men. A couple of years later, you get Generation X, the team led by Jubilee with like Monet and Chamber and all those guys. Later on than that, you got the Academy X kids, where we get characters like Hellion and Pixie. Then there was another Generation X. This is the team that had like Bling and Nature Girl, I think, on it. And I think what I've heard talking to people that know the X-Men is if you read the comics, the X-Men that are your X-Men, besides maybe if you have like ones on the original team that you really connect with, are the ones that you were reading at the time it was coming out that are the same age as you were. So if you were going to high school at the same time as the Academy X kids, you really liked Academy X. This wasn't always true, but like I've heard this sentiment expressed by many X-Men fans. Like, yeah, I really like all of these guys, but them specifically I felt that they were almost like my peers. And I wouldn't say I was like that because I was not reading X-Men comics as a kid. However, I'll say X-Men Evolution was that, to the point where it made characters like Kitty and Nightcrawler feel like integral parts of the X-Men, when in reality, they were not always, core X-Men characters. I would say they became core X-Men characters, especially Kitty, over time when like Joss Whedon started writing. Since then, she's been, a really integral part of the X-Men. But I guess what I'm saying is, for me, X-Men Evolution was the X-Men. I know people that love Wolverine in the X-Men. I think Wolverine in the X-Men was also very good, but we kind of have a problem, which is since Wolverine in the X-Men, which ended a long time ago, more than 10 years ago, we've not had a new X-Men animated series aimed at kids, right? That X-Men Evolution was, like Wolverine in the X-Men, and like X-Men the Animated Series. These were the things that got me as a child interested in the X-Men, and I think also got a lot of other people that were young interested in the X-Men. The X-Men are a great team for kids to like. Like, they're Spider-Man's the same way, but like compared to like Iron Man, Captain America, like, yeah, it's helpful for kids to have like a role model like Captain America, who's like stands for truth and justice and all that stuff. But it's really nice for them to have a role model and like a comic character who they can look at and say, oh, this is a kid in a high school who is picked on for being different for whatever reason, because of superpowers, because of some other racism, it doesn't matter. But they are a character who I, a child who does not fit in for whatever reason, can relate to. And also, like, even if you are a kid that fits in, the X-Men are a thing that you can look at and say, oh, right, this is why being a bully is bad, right? Like, again, like, not all comics need to be Mr. Rogers or anything like that. But I do think the X-Men, as characters, have a lot of value for kids. So X-Men 97 is coming back. So we have an opportunity right now. I'm sure there's going to be movies and lots of TV shows, and that'll be the next phase, everything after, Secret Wars. But right now we're getting an X-Men animated series. And I'm kind of bummed that it's not for kids. And I'm sure it's a little bit for kids, but it's for me. It's for people that are my age, maybe a little bit older. People in their, like, I don't know, late 30s is maybe the target demo here, early 30s at least. I would say 30s and up. That's not saying I don't think it'll be good, or I don't think a kid will enjoy it. But it's definitely trading on the nostalgia of the 90s, and it really helps if you've seen other episodes of this show that, let's be honest, the kids aren't right now turning on the TV and watching the X-Men animated series from 30 plus years ago. So I guess while I'm excited that this show exists, because it's better than nothing, I'd rather have this than nothing, I would also think maybe now is the time that Marvel and Disney should be developing a new cartoon for children based off the X-Men. Now, it could be a reboot, kind of like X-Men Evolution was, where you're taking characters like Scott, Jean, Gambit, Rogue, Storm, whoever, and making them like Gen Z or even younger Gen Alpha. Or it could be taking like a class of mutants that we haven't really done too much with. Academy X really comes to mind here as like a team that would work for this. Take like Mercury, Hellion, and make a series focused on them, set today, while they are like joining the X-Men. So maybe even like this could be set in the X-Men the animated series universe, where like a lot of these other X-Men are much older, but these are the new crop of X-Men. Because I don't want the X-Men to become one of those franchises that is mostly for fans of the old stuff. I think you see this with a lot of things. Or Ghostbusters, you could probably say is this. Even though I'm sure like there are a lot of kids that enjoy the new Ghostbusters movies, I'd say largely because of how they've decided to bring back all the old Ghostbusters for this new one. It seems like they're really banking on that being the draw, which means they want people who watch the old movies to come watch this one. Like, do I understand why I do that, especially with something like Ghostbusters? Absolutely. It was always a series focused on adults. It was a series about the, 4 working class exterminators who just happen to be exterminating ghosts. But the X-Men, when it works really well, one of the things it can do is be for kids. And I think there is a great opportunity here, especially today, especially in 2024, to make this culturally diverse superhero team, this very woke superhero team, like the focus of a Marvel show. And I know they're kind of doing that. Like they've taken, characters like Sunspot in the new series and elevated them. So it's not going to be, the whitest team of X-Men that ever has existed. But I guess, like they still, I would imagine, if you are a 10-year-old and your dad is 40 and he's watching the X-Men animated series because it's something he watched in childhood, it's that phrase, those are your daddy's X-Men. Those are not your X-Men. And even if it's not the greatest thing ever, like it's not animated the same way that the animated series was, like that really, really detailed, beautiful animation, or even what they're doing with X-Men 97, where it's whatever this what if style is. It can be much simpler than that. I just think kids need some X-Men. I hope when we do X-Men stuff in the MCU, they start with Cyclops and Jean in them as adults and really focus on some young characters. But I think it would help if some of those characters were characters that were not big players in the movies and shows previously. I mean, you could even do Generation X, right? Like Chamber, Skin, Monet, Jubilee, Husk, all of those characters could be kind of retrofitted to be children because they have not been the focus of any of these, big shows or movies. And like they've always been children, but they can be children from 2024. So they can be 15 now. If I was in charge of X-Men at Marvel, that's the first thing I'd do. An animated series with characters that are familiar, so maybe like Scott and Emma, like in the Academy X series, are the headmasters, and maybe, some other X-Men, are kind of scattered among this group, but led by a team of X-Men that are meant to feel more like contemporary teenagers. Have this show be aimed at like, teenagers, kids younger than that, 10, whatever. Just make it a show that is cool and fun and has all of the charm and everything we already like of the X-Men, and make it something that is first and foremost for children. That is what I think they should do. So am I excited for X-Men 97? Absolutely. I'm buying all the action figures. The fact that those exist alone is like blowing my mind, is making me very happy. But I hope that that is not where the X-Men at Disney Animated Studios ends. That's all I'm saying.